Jenny Quintana grew up in Essex and Berkshire before studying English literature in London. She went on to teach in London, Seville and Athens, and has written a number of books for teaching English as a foreign language. She now lives with her family in Berkshire. Her debut thriller, The Missing Girl, was published in 2017. It is full of twists and turns and centres on a desperate hunt to solve a decades-old mystery. What did happen to Anna Flores' sister Gabriella, who disappeared when Anna was just a child? Her second book, Our Dark Secret, appeared in 2020. It's centred around two girls, Elizabeth and Rachel, and is summed up simply: 2 girls, 2 deaths, 2 decades of silence. Both of Jenny's books have received glowing and in some cases rapturous reviews. When I spoke to her, she started by telling me something about her background.
I'm from Berkshire. Well, actually I'm from Essex, and I moved here when I was quite young, about 11, moved to Reading, where I am now. Stayed for quite a long time, studied English literature in London, and from there I became a teacher, teaching in a secondary school in Tower Hamlets in London. And then after I'd had enough of that, I really wanted to live abroad. That was always something that I desperately wanted to do. So I went off to Seville, and then from there I went to Greece, Athens. I had a friend there, which was one of the reasons I went. So I began teaching there, and while I was in Greece, I got involved in a local Greek publisher, and I started editing and then writing ELT, English as a foreign language work. So I was doing teaching and the writing and the editing all sort of simultaneously in Athens. And when I came back to England, I brought those skills back, I suppose, and I became freelance at that point and moved into editing first and then kind of exclusively writing ELT materials and books, and that's where my career sort of ended up. Not deliberately, but that's how it was. And then so I stayed freelance from then. Had my children, carried on being freelance. That's how it worked for me.
So there you were, you're successfully publishing these books, of which there are quite a lot. You have this career, you have this family, and yet you decide to write a novel.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, it wasn't a snap decision though, because being a writer was what I wanted to do from the very first moment that I can remember. Being a child, I read everything, and my dream was to be a writer.
Who were you influenced by? What were the writers that you went, they're really great, that's what I want to be?
Well, to begin with, after I got through the usual childhood books, I was about 12 actually when I started reading Agatha Christie, and I remember writing my own novel when I was 12, sort of in that style. But then I quickly got into things like Thomas Hardy and Dickens and the Brontes and Wilkie Collins and lots of kind of Gothic literature, Wuthering Heights, books like that. The Gothic I really love, combined with the mystery of Agatha Christie originally, but you've got it perfectly done in Wilkie Collins, for example. So that was the beginning for me in my teens, I suppose. And Daphne du Maurier as well was a huge influence for me. But again, I came to her quite late, which was interesting. For some reason, she kind of passed me by. And John Fowles as well. I was reading a lot of him. French Lieutenant's Woman was one of my favourite books back then.
You decide to write a novel, and you decide to write... It's difficult to describe, and I'm not going to go into the plot because that would be terrible. But it's like a mystery thriller, and in fact, The Missing Girl, which is the first novel, is described as full of twists and turns, and it is a desperate hunt to solve a decades-old mystery. I mean, where did that story arrive from for you?
It's not actually the first novel that I wrote. It's the first published novel, but I had been writing. Short stories was my build-up to, in a way, test the waters, which was a bit naive because short stories are completely different from a novel. But that was the way I sort of began, just to build my confidence. And then I wrote a novel, a couple of novels, and they didn't go anywhere. So The Missing Girl was the first one that got me a publishing deal. And that came from, it was a combination, it sort of gathered all the themes that I'm interested in. But as it began with just the characters, and I think every one of my novels begins with the character. So in the case of The Missing Girl, Anna and Gabrielle, the sisters, came to me almost fully formed, and it was just a case of what was going to happen to them and deciding who was going to be the narrator. So I decided Anna, the younger one, and it was what is the worst thing that could happen to her, and that was where the idea came for Gabriella to disappear. And I am very influenced by real events, and how real events, extraordinary events, tragic events, affect ordinary people. And so I wanted to build that kind of idea into The Missing Girl. And of course, in real life, lots of times children go missing, but often the focus is on the parents, particularly the mother. And I wondered what it would be like for the sibling, for that gaping hole in their life when their brother or sister doesn't come back and they can't make sense of it and they can't understand it. So that was really what I wanted to create in The Missing Girl, that kind of emotion and the psychology of it and the effect on tragic events on ordinary people.
Interesting theme about secrets in both the novels that I've read of yours. I mean, there's a quote in The Missing Girl: "Sometimes our parents don't tell us things for a reason, well-founded or ill-founded. And if we pick through our lives, we have to take the consequences." It's this idea of going and looking into something and, be careful what you wish for is very much the
same. Absolutely. Yeah, delving into secrets of your parents' past it's interesting because once you become a parent, you see it a little bit differently from how you see it as a child. So there are quite a lot of things that me as an adult would like to know about my parents' lives, but there are things about my life which I wouldn't necessarily want my children to find out about. So there's that interesting sort of balance between what you look for and what you think is best to leave. Yes, and of course in The Missing Girl, those things are discovered.
Another wonderful moment in it where you seem to get right inside the head of a child that's had tragedy. And it's quite a long quote, but I'm going to read it. And the narrator says, which is Anna, "A clock chimed, a muffled sound at the back of the room, and a memory tapped in my head. The pendulum clock at home. When Gabriella disappeared, the clock stopped. The silence had been like an expression of her absence. One day after my father had died and my mother was out, I'd taken a chair, climbed up and given the key a hefty twist. And as the ticking began again, it seemed as if my sister and my father might come home." I found that incredibly moving, and also the expression of hope transcending fact, which is very much at the root of what you write about. Is that fair?
Yes. Yes, I think it is. And that desperation that children feel when, in Anna's case, she couldn't understand why all of these things had happened. And because she's also not allowed to understand, because I think it's less so now, but I think it still does exist, that kind of secrecy that parents and adults have with their children so that children don't find out. So often Anna is finding things out through listening or through, stealth in some way. Nobody actually sits down with her and explains properly what's actually happened. And then there's this other layer of secrets there, which they can't and don't want to allow her to understand. So yes, I think it's terribly sad for children if that kind of truth is kept from them.
There's also a third figure, this extraordinary girl Martha, who's like a sort of Miss Havisham-esque figure, sort of appears. Where did she come from? I mean, you described creating Anna and Gabriella almost up front, but this girl Martha suddenly appears.
Yes, I don't know where she came from. I think she came from memories at school. There's always a child who's ostracised, and I remember that from my primary school. I remember there was a family that everybody kind of didn't like, and they were mean to them, and they were like really mean and would throw eggs at the house or something like that. And I think she came from there, that kind of sad figure, and you don't know what is going on behind closed doors and what she is suffering. And so I guess I wanted to convey that sort of sad life that she had through memories of how that happens in reality. But terribly sad, because it's a very cruel world, isn't it? Childhood and adolescence. It's a cruel, difficult world to navigate your way through, and it seems such a terrible time because children don't have the skills, so they're learning, and it can have such an effect. And actually, in Our Dark Secret, that is the case with Elizabeth, in that she's affected by the way people perceive her and see her, and she reacts to them, and that carries on through her life. Whereas inside, she's a completely different person. Same with Martha.
You talk about memory, and in fact, The Missing Girl is set in 1982 and the present day. And I was alive in 82, I remember it. But you have an extraordinary eye and ear and memory for detail that just places the time. Are you very conscious that is that researched, or is that memory, or how does that come about?
That is largely memory, because I remember 1980, and both places in both novels that I've had published so far are a kind of a mix of places that I lived and grew up as a child. So it's not a real place, but it's a mix up of memories and things that I recall as a child. So it is memory, with quite a bit of other imagination thrown in, I think. But sense of place is very important to me. And I particularly like for example, the orchard in Our Dark Secret. We had an orchard. I remember an orchard when I was very small, and my mother going out apple picking. So I remember that kind of what it was like, and how large it seemed when you're very small, and how sort of spooky and everything. And similarly with the woods in The Missing Girl.
The second novel, Our Dark Secret, which is actually encapsulated in line, Our Dark Secret, 2 girls, 2 deaths, 2 decades of silence. And that's even more of a stretch, because that's 69, 77, 78 and 99, and no contemporary world at all in it. I mean, talk about a challenge. So again, just building on your experiences that you remember from the places and times you lived.
Yeah, I think building on experience, and I mean, I do check, I do research and look, because sometimes, I might have been very small when like 1969, but I don't recall exactly those things, but I kind of have the feel of it, and once I've got the feel of it, I can do. I'm not sure that I would actually write an historical novel as I perceive an historical novel, which would be before I was in existence. I'm not sure I would do that, because I don't particularly enjoy doing the research. I find that gets in the way. So if necessary, I will look things up, and you do have to look up some things, like the music is always quite important and things like that. So I try to get those little facts right. But generally I think in a novel like the ones I write, it's important to get a sense of the place rather than sort of hammering home the little bits of the details. So I hope that I try to get that sense, and anything I'm not sure about, I will look up, or I might check with my older brothers, for example, or somebody.
When you're writing what is quite a structurally intricate book, I mean, do you hold it in your... People are always interested in writers. Do you kind of hold it in your brain, or do you just work from beginning to end and polish it up in the middle, if you see what I mean? How do you control it as a writer?
That's interesting, because I think I hold it in my I hold it in my mind. I don't plan. I know the beginning and I know the end, and I always know the characters, because, as I said, the characters are the most important thing, and the plot comes second. So I know the beginning and I know the end. So it's just a question of navigating there. And I change my mind all the time. I'm writing my 4th novel at the moment, and I'm just sort of in the middle thinking, where am I? And then suddenly a thought will come, and you realise why you put a detail in sort of on page 10. You can pick it up on page 80, and it's almost like it just happens. But with those 2 books I've written in the past and the present, and when I was writing The Missing Girl, I tried to do it all at once, and then I realised I can't actually do that. So I did the past all in one go. I had to get that past story right, and then I went back to the present, and then I kind of put them together by a method which is instinct rather than anything else. It was absolute instinct. So I would put them together, the chapters, because in The Missing Girl it's every other chapter. In Our Dark Secret it's different. And it didn't... I don't know. And then I would put them together and I'd read it through. I think, that's not quite right. They don't know that. And then I would change it around. And I kind of did the same for Our Dark Secret, even though it's not every other chapter. But instinct and keeping it in my head and learning as you go through the process. And that often comes through the characters. So learning more and more about your characters and thinking, well, how would they behave next? And sometimes I find if I'm stuck with dialogue, I'm thinking, that's because I don't know this character well enough. Whereas when I know the character, the dialogue just comes and I'm reading it and think, oh yeah, that's absolutely right. But with when I'm getting stuck, I'm thinking, right, you've got to work on that character. You don't know that person, that character properly.
You talk about this being the first one that was published. I mean, how did you feel as it was coming to the point that you were going to share it with strangers? How did that feel?
It felt exciting and terribly nerve-wracking. So yeah, it was very nerve-wracking. I mean, I was thrilled because I'd got finally what I wanted, dreamed of from being a very small girl. So that was wonderful, but I was very nervous. And then now I'm... so, you look at the reviews and you think, you get good reviews and you get not so good reviews. And at the beginning, that affected me. But now I think, well, I can't write a book that the person who gives me 5 stars and the person who gives me 1 star is going to like. So I can't write a book like that to satisfy everyone. So I can only write a book that I believe in and that I want to write. And so I kind of let it go and carry on doing what I believe in, I suppose.
Successful first book. I talked to Rachel about this as well. I mean, the problem is always the second book. What do? Do you do the same thing again? How did you feel about being challenged to write the second one?
Well, I had a lot of difficulty writing that second book because the first one did do well, and it was Thrill of the Month at Waterstones, which was incredible. So I was thrilled by what happened with The Missing Girl. But while that was all happening, I was in the middle of writing book 2, and I think, well, this book is nowhere near as good as that one. And I think one of the problems is that first novel. No, it was my 3rd novel, but it was a sort of an amalgamation. You hold it in your head for so long, and then suddenly I had a contract for 2 books, so suddenly I had to write the second novel. And I was thinking, oh yes, of course I can do that. I've done it once, I can do it again. In fact, I've done it 3 times, I can do it again. But I found it really, really difficult. And every time I saw something good happening with The Missing Girl, I kept thinking, oh no, how am I going to match that? And in fact, I worked on a novel for almost a year and I ditched it because I just thought, I don't believe in this, it's not working. And I moved away from it and I went back to an idea I'd had before, and I found Elizabeth's voice in Our Dark Secret. And as soon as I wrote a few pages in her voice, I thought, this is the book. The other one has to go. This is the book. And once I'd got that and believed in it, then I did it relatively very quickly, actually. So, yeah. But it was still very nerve-wracking, that second one. Whereas the third one, I had no problems writing at all, or my fourth. So definitely the second novel, the second album syndrome is a thing.
The third and the fourth novels are yet to be published. I think we need to make that clear. Yes. I have to congratulate you with Our Dark Secret, because I think it has one of the best opening lines I've ever read, which goes, "I met Rachel in the summer of 1978, the year before they found the first body." I mean, come on. Two people, the year, and a body in one line. I thought that was just kind of brilliant. It's haunted me. It's an absolute lesson to writers about how to draw a reader in, I think. I congratulate you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it took some time to get that together. I think I reworded that 100 times possibly, but yes, I wanted to get all those different elements into that one sentence. Thank you.
How you draw the reader in is very important, isn't it? Do you worry about that? Or?
I do worry about it, but pace is so important. So I have to, and I've learnt that as well. Finish your chapter, make sure your reader wants to read on. So I keep that very much in mind. In that, why does the reader want to turn the page? It doesn't have to be a massive, huge secret, but it has to be something that they want to find out, or they want a situation to be resolved, whether it's an argument or a personal, something to do with the relationship of the characters, or to find out what that body is, or who that body is in that opening line. So if you need to keep feeding them little bits of information in order to get people wanting to read on, and that's very important. And that, I think, that's all about pace and character, of course. Always back to character, and people wanting to find out about character, wanting to carry on with their journey with that character, even if they're not perfect. Like Elizabeth isn't perfect; she's flawed, and Anna is flawed, but that makes them more real. And I hope gets the reader on side with the character.
And Elizabeth is physically challenged, if you see what I mean. She's someone who's again an outsider because of how large she is, presumably.
Yeah, she is. Poor Elizabeth. She has that, but she's also very clever, and that doesn't go down well in the school that she's in, and so she hides it, and she hides it so successfully that most of the teachers don't. Only one teacher, the English teacher, recognises how clever she is. The others just write her off and assume she's a nobody, which is also really sad for Elizabeth, because she's always aspiring for something. And, well, I don't want to give away anything, but yeah.
It is difficult to talk about it because you don't want to give anything away, because it is a profound secret, anyone who hasn't read it. And and I'm going to quote a few things at you, really. There's a wonderful moment where Elizabeth says, "I was creating a fairy tale friendship. And the problem with fairy tales is that they're packed with bad characters as well as good. In fairy tales, it's obvious who these bad characters are. In real life, it's more difficult to tell." And I get a sense in the second novel that we're getting into very ancient modes of storytelling rather wonderfully. Were you conscious of that you were beginning to explore almost the nature of how you write as well as your characters?
I'm not sure. I think it's just what I'm interested in. So this comes back to this whole idea: ordinary people living, experiencing extraordinary things, and not only just being on the receiving end of it, but the perpetrators who do extraordinary, awful things, and just why? And yet they're just ordinary looking people. You can't tell who are the good guys and who are the bad guys, I suppose, to put it crudely. But
and there's one other quote I want to quote actually, because it leapt out of me because I recognise it, and she says, "I know I should have moved on, decided what will happen next, but it's so hard and it won't do any harm to wait a little longer. I pull out the notebook, my fingers trembling as I take the pen. Not that I've written anything, it's still inside my head, nearly there, at the end of the story, just a little more time while my mind slips to the end. It almost reads like a writer's lament, actually.
Yeah.
I thought, the interesting thing is that you get your characters within the story to tell a story. Are you very conscious of
Right.
that?
Yes, I suppose I think she needed to, because Our Dark Secret starts with that revelation of the body, and she knows who it is and she knows why that body is there. So we as readers need to sort of go on the journey that Elizabeth is going on. In the same way with Anna, I think that's true. So they take the reader with them on the journey. And in Elizabeth's case, she doesn't need to write it down, I suppose, because is it a confession or is it an exploration? It's sort of, there's that question: what is it that she is going to reveal? And it has to be that sort of ambiguity all the way through as to the truth. And she doesn't need to write it down, even though. But that kind of gives that idea that it could be a confession, but is it?
I found Elizabeth a very compelling character. And you describe her as, I was Elizabeth Valentine, the girl of no consequence. I was invisible. I always have been. It almost breaks your heart reading about Elizabeth. And you're very clever with her because she has another name, which we're not going to say, but you don't reveal to the very end. And it sums her character up in a funny way. I mean, were you conscious of unpeeling, sort of almost like an onion, this character as you wrote the book?
Yeah. Yes, I was. I think she is a very complex character, Elizabeth, and she isn't me, but I think I understand part of her, that feeling of always being a little bit outside, a little bit not quite part of what's going on. I think it's the point of being the outsider and living also in your imagination a lot. Elizabeth particularly lives in her imagination. She's always imagining things and she's never quite sure if it's real or if it isn't. And I think that's her way of making sense of who she is, and sort of trying to understand what's going on around her. And also she can retreat into herself. She can be somebody else when she's on her own, and she can see things differently, even though she's often not seeing the truth. And that's possibly the problem in that her imagination is colliding with the truth. So it's a question of navigating through. She's a very sad character, Elizabeth. Poor thing.
You resolve the mystery and anyone come to read it. I mean, it's very sad. It made me cry at the end, really. It's a very sad ending, and both of them have dark endings, if you like. You've described writing 2 more novels. I mean, are they on similar themes? Can you tell us a bit about novels 3 and 4?
The third novel, which is I've written and is with the publisher and is kind of finished, to just sort of at the copy editing stage. That is again about similar themes. It's about a woman who is abandoned as a baby. So you have the themes of identity and loss and mystery, but it is a little bit different from the other two, because the other two are more sort of coming of age books, but this one, which is The Hiding Place, is told from 2 points of view, a mother and a child, and also another character. And it is in the past and the present, but it's in the third person as well. So as the other two are in the first person. So I don't know if I consciously did that. I think I wanted to do something different, and that hence the different points of view, and the third person, and that's set in London. Yes, it's quite different, I think, in style, but it has a lot of similarities in terms of it's in the 60s again, and the 80s. So again, it's that thing again, but it's different I think it's different in style. But the themes, absolutely, identity. It's all the things that I'm interested in, identity and exploring the past and making sense of the past. So that's that. And then the fourth one, I'm sort of writing. It's still a mystery, but it has a bit of a love story in it, which I haven't done before, but quite low key love story. But it's about that relationship, and actually, what I think I'm doing is looking at different kinds of relationships. So, in The Missing Girl, it's sisters. In Our Dark Secret, we have friends. In Hiding Place, third one, mother and daughter, and now I've got a sort of a relationship in the fourth one. So I like looking at. I think having two characters is what makes the novel work for me. How they interact and how they react. Yeah.
Do you get irritated as a writer if people say, well, this is... look for parts of the writer and what they're reading? In other words, this is... You've said this isn't you. But, there is this tendency to think, oh, well, no, I understand. That's because she's like this.
I don't get irritated by it. I do think that in every experience you have as a writer comes out in your books somewhere. So even though those characters aren't me, I think they have parts of me. But then I think the other characters do as well. So yes, I'm not those characters, but I've observed those characters, I suppose. Like Elizabeth, I've observed some aspects of her I feel and I understand. So it's a kind of combination of them all. But I think if you're... I put quite a lot of emotion into my books, and that must come from me, I think, as a person. So if you're talking about grief and loss and friendship and love, that it doesn't matter. I've never lost a sister. I don't have a sister. But you've still lost something. You've still experienced grief. So you can use that same emotion that you've experienced in a different sense. It's not really that different, and everybody experiences it. It's universal, all these emotions and feelings. And I think as a writer, you use what you know, whether it's facts or whether it's experiences or whether it's emotions, and that goes into your work. I think that's how it works from my point of view, anyway.
And how does your writing work? I mean, do you assign a time today? Do you do a certain amount of words? How does that work?
When I wrote when I wrote The Missing Girl, I needed to get to the end. So I did the method of writing every day, 1,000 words, whenever I could. I was working freelance. I still do some ELT work. So I had to try and work it round that. But I work best in the morning, but I'm not always able to work when I want to because I have a busy household. So I don't always get the time, the peace that I need. But my best time for work is early. So if I'm awake, I'll get up at 5 o'clock. Not because I want to, but I'm awake, so I might as well get up and write. And then I do my best work between that time and say 11. And then after that, I'm not as productive. I will still write, but it's not the same. And I do like to be on my own in the house, but there's no chance of that at the moment under present circumstances. So I just make the best of what I can do, and because I've got children and because I'm freelance and have been, I just do it as I can. I make the best of what I can. But so I don't have a routine. I wish I did, but I wish I could have. But certainly, early morning is the time.
Do Do you believe everyone's got a story to tell and they should write it? Or do you think it's something that just happens to you?
I think that everybody probably has a story to tell, but whether they have the inclination to write it or it takes a lot of dedication to sit down and write it. So I kind of think that's up to them. But for me, it wasn't that I had a story to tell, it's just that I wanted to tell stories. So, and that was my compulsion. But I'm not sure everybody wants to do that, because it's hard work. It's very stressful, writing a novel. But fantastic as well. So it varies, depending where you are in the novel writing process, as to how stressful it is. But I wouldn't necessarily recommend it unless somebody really wants to and has that sort of natural compulsion and desire to write, because that's where it comes from. And you have to, I mean, I've been trying for a very, very long time before I got my success. So I could have given up, but every time I thought I'll give up, I thought, no, I've got to do it. I won't be happy unless I do this. So I think if you feel it, that you have to feel it deeply, and you have to feel, I won't be happy, I won't fulfill my life unless I write this novel or I write this down. But I think everybody is capable of doing it if they want to, but it's that desire that is the key, and the dedication.